Morning. My name is Avanti Hawk, and I am delighted to be here with you this morning on the unceded ancestral occupied homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the occupied homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and recognize that they are the original stewards of these lands. So I raise my hands, and just a short introduction to myself. My name, as I've mentioned, is Avanti, and I am one of the Indigenous Cultural Safety Coordinators here at Aboriginal Health. And I am a first-generation settler who grew up on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Dene, Dakota, and Innu peoples. Also, are people having trouble hearing? Okay. I think if you are having trouble, okay. Sorry. So if anybody is having issues, maybe just check your audio settings. Sorry, as I was saying, I am very excited to present my colleague and good friend, Tammy Brumwell, who is the clinical coordinator of Indigenous mental wellness and substance use for the virtual team here at Aboriginal Health. So without any further ado, I present to you, Tammy.
Thank you, Avanti, for the introduction, very kind, and starting us off in a good way with the land acknowledgement. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I thought I would start off by telling a little bit about myself. I am a mixed white European uninvited settler heritage. I was born and raised in the Tlahtli unceded and occupied First Nations territory, also known as Prince George or PG. I consider myself to come from a long line of strong and loving matriarchs, and I like to honor that today. I am a daughter, mother, and guardian to several animals and creatures who I share my garden with, a partner to a loving and very patient and kind individual, and a friend to some very fun and loving people. I consider it a gift to be a visitor and living in the unceded Coast Salish territory of Burnaby. Prior moving into my role at Aboriginal Health, I worked as a social worker in VGH Emergency Department and have worked at Vancouver Coastal just over 24 years. Oh, please, next slide, please. Before I continue any further, I would like to take this opportunity to honor and acknowledge all of the 14 First Nations communities within Vancouver Coastal Region and send out my respects to the elders of the lands, present, past, and future. This slide shows the names and logos of each nation. Each symbol has a special meaning to each Indigenous community and are an integral part of their visual identity. Many of the symbols have traditional stories behind them. It is with the greatest respect and care that I bring these to you today. Next slide, please. Many of the Indigenous communities in Vancouver Coastal Region have websites, which I encourage you all to visit. You can learn a great deal about the community's history, governance, and language in their relationship with the land, whether it is resource stewardship or land guardianship. I have learned that each community has a unique spiritual relationship and connection with their particular territory and land, which shapes their culture, tradition, and history. For example, when you visit Kitasoo and Hay Nation website, as shown on the slide above, you are generously offered the opportunity to learn about the nation's history and see how the Kitasoo and Hay people share their land and water with the animals, fish, and birds, including the magical spirit bear. You will also learn that prior to the 1860s, the Kitasoo and Hay were two distinct nations coming from different geographies. The two nations didn't speak the same language prior to the introduction of English. Next slide, please. I consider it an honor and gift to work with the mental wellness and substance use workforce who work in the 14 First Nations communities within the Vancouver coastal region. The mental wellness and substance use, the mental wellness and substance use service providers are not VCH employees, but employed by each nation. The clinical coordinator role and associated mental wellness and substance use workforce team evolved from a pilot project called the JPB Mental Wellness Flagship Project. JPB stands for the Joint Project Board. The project was formed from a response to lengthy engagement with the First Nations community. And my role specifically was developed and supported by Vancouver Coastal Health, the First Nations Health Authority, and working in partnership with the First Nations health leaders. First Nations Health Authority has been collecting essential knowledge, advice, and guidance from the First Nations communities. The community knowledge assessment and exchange, which I would really like to emphasize, captured the understanding of the community's needs and ensured that the program and team development, design development, was community-driven and nation-based. It took into consideration not only the internal conditions of each community, but also the external conditions affecting each. Within the mental wellness and substance use workforce itself, it was identified that the service providers were experiencing challenges working in isolation and wanted professional development support. This is where my role comes in. I support the team with their professional development competencies by hosting and leading the development of a virtual community of practice. I facilitate virtual service training and other means of education. I bring in people to host and educate on specific topics. I develop resource development, and I also maintain regular communication. I support the service providers working within the communities navigate the Vancouver Coastal Health Support services for their clients when their clients need to access them outside of the community as well. A primary goal is to reduce the impacts of working in isolation for the mental wellness and substance use workforce, which in turn builds capacity in rural and remote Indigenous communities to improve the mental health outcomes and reduce the substance use challenges faced by First Nations and Indigenous people.
Tammy, it sounds to me that knowledge exchange and wisdom that are coming from the First Nations communities really ensure that program development for each nation was community driven.
Yes, it is a critical aspect of being in a helping partnership, I believe. And I feel that in order for people outside of the communities who are non-Indigenous to achieve this partnership, they need to come from a place of cultural humility and respect. There needs to be a positive and respectful connections made to nurture the partnership. It is essential that we be willing to listen and learn. Next slide, please. Cultural safety and humility and respect, I believe, are the cornerstones of my practice. I'm trying to avoid the sun here too, actually. When engaging in the First Nations communities or any form of engagement and relationship I may have with an Indigenous person, I have been very fortunate to have been invited to visit some of the Indigenous communities within Vancouver Coastal. This slide shows pictures from when I went to Naquatqua and Skatine. Naquatqua is located in the Southern Coast Mountains at the southern end of Anderson Lake and about midway between the towns of Pemberton and Lillooet. Skatine Nation is located on the east side of Lillooet River and on the 19th mile post of the old Harrison-Lillooet Wagon Road, which is about 35 kilometers from the head of Harrison Lake. Some of you may actually visit the Skookumchuck Rapids, which are very close to the Skatine community. Naquatqua and Skatine and two other nations named Shawmaquem and Hotcha are rural and remote communities that receive holistic community care services through the Southern Statlium Health Center. I appreciate how the health center focuses on the whole person in a culturally appropriate way and considers the land, family, and community and nation when supporting them. When I visited Skatine, I attended their Winter Wellness Festival and mini powwow with my previous director, Dion, and Jennifer, who is the Regional Mental Health, Health and Wellness Liaison from the First Nations Health Authority. A picture of Jen is on the top left corner, and Dion's picture is on the bottom right. We were helping the senior project manager, Fran, from the Southern Statliam Health Center set up for the festival. The picture of Dion and Jen show them putting up posters where the community members were encouraged to write down what they felt contributed to their mental wellness. I'm going to move my computer a bit here because the sun's coming around. It was Skateen's first time holding a powwow in their community, and they were very excited and proud to hold such a wonderful event. Skateen community members historically had to travel to other communities to dance and participate in powwows. The picture on the bottom left is a picture of a mother and daughter in their dance regalia. It was the daughter's first powwow. I consider it a great honor and gift that I was able to attend. The additional pictures of the fire and pictures of the horses and dogs are from Nakwakwa, where I attended a winter wellness talk by the fire. The Southern Statliam Health Center invited community members to come by the fire and discuss what contributed to their well-being. Elected Chief Mika Savage built an amazing fire which withstood a very wet winter day. His picture is on the top right, standing by the fire. Even amongst the rain, the fire was a catalyst for engaging in conversation, honoring and celebrating relationships. I consider it a gift to participate in the wellness talk by the fire and hear the stories, customs, and traditions that were shared with me. Also, when we were talking by the fire, a beautiful group of horses who live in the community came by to graze and play in the field next to us. I have been told that the white and black horse is named Mickey. Unfortunately, I can't remember the dog's name, but he spent the whole day out with us. I think he was actually trying to get some of the deer stew that was being served.
Tammy.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's all right. No, I was just thinking about what you were mentioning earlier in terms of the cornerstone of your engagement. Coming together with communities is really bringing in cultural humility and respect. And I know at Vancouver Coastal Health that we really try to emphasize these values when we serve our clients. I can see the importance of ensuring that these values are brought into community engagement. You know, historically, settlers, particularly people that have been working in helping professions, have not always done that work with intention. And so I was just thinking about the fact that this is such an important part of the work that you do. I also recall in our earlier conversations, you were mentioning that you had acquired permission from Chief Thaverge, I hope I am pronouncing his name correctly, in order to use the photos of the land, and also how it's very important to get consent for use of photos and any type of an area where there is consent that's being involved. So I think that's something that we need to really be thinking about when we're doing this work.
Yes, Monty, I totally agree. I think it's definitely a part of being mindful engagement and respect, and that you are a visitor going into the community, and it's an honor and gift. So definitely need to be mindful and gracious. Thank you. Next slide, please. My next slide. Thank you. My role is further guided by the principles identified in a local planning and system transformation approach for the promotion of mental wellness and substance use and the reduction of substance use and related harms for First Nations, Indigenous people, and their communities. First Nations communities within BC provided their knowledge, advice, and guidance to develop a 10-year provincial approach to facilitate regional and local planning and action. It was a health partnership accord with the First Nations Health Authority, the British Columbia Ministry of Health, and Health Canada. The actions and planning can be found in a document called A Path Forward, which provides a vision, guiding values, goals, and principles that underpin strategic directions and sample actions. The plan also speaks to involving a growing family of collaborative partners committed to improving the mental wellness outcomes, reducing the substance use challenges faced by First Nations and Indigenous people. I suggest when you have a chance to review this document, which can be easily found on the internet in the PDF format. I found it a very valuable resource when I started my position and remain to use it as a guide and reference today. The picture on the slide is actually the front cover of the document, which can be helpful for when you're looking for it on the internet if you choose. I believe, Avanti, you were going to look at putting it in the chat box too, the link to it?
Yes, yeah, that's correct, Tammy. I am going to be sharing that in our chat box, and I just want to thank you, Tammy, for sharing that resource. And if you're unable to access it in the chat box, we're also going to be sending a follow-up email with a list of the resources that Tammy is sharing with us today. Next slide, please.
I'm going to speak a bit more to the path forward because it is such an important concept to the work I do, and I believe any health services that are going to be working with First Nations communities and Indigenous people. The Path Forward document further identifies that First Nations communities advised the promotion of mental wellness and transformation of healthcare and wellness outcomes. That, oh, we gotta go, slides are going all over the place. Go back to the last one, please, the one before that. Okay, well, I'll keep going. The wellness outcome would require community-based and culturally safe and holistic care approach while attending to this with a population health lens. This is not only identified as being needed within the communities itself, but also within the partnerships of external agencies. I believe it's a couple more slides. Okay, we missed it, but that's okay. We'll go back another one. Okay. The success of the plan will depend upon the partnerships and relationships that have reciprocal accountability, which means that each partner is accountable to another for its actions and for the effective implementation and operation of their responsibilities and systems. Recognizing that their work and partners and that their work as partners is interdependent and interconnected. Yes, it's a slide here. This means to me that VGH will need to work together at all levels in a collaborative manner to achieve the shared goals related to mental wellness and substance use challenges for the First Nations Indigenous people. This brings me to another aspect of my role, which is to support Vancouver Coastal Health and staff in their partnership and reciprocal accountability. I am here to advise and help VCH staff coordinate a trauma-informed and culturally safe discharge for Indigenous clients in regards to mental wellness and substance use. I'm here to help bring an Indigenous lens to the VCH regional mental health and substance use clinical practice. I'm a resource for care coordination and can provide insight to a client's potential barriers to discharge and systematic environmental risks that they may face when they return to the community. These environmental risks may include, but are not limited to, remote, isolated home communities and lack of services within these communities. I'm also here to assist VCH staff liaise with rural and remote community mental wellness and substance use care providers and help bring the two worlds together, which in turn enhance the continuity of care for Indigenous clients. A goal of my work is to help VCH build a trusting relationship and partnership with the First Nations communities so VCH can ultimately participate in genuine reconciliation.
Yeah, it's my understanding that when it comes to reciprocity, the onus is really on non-Indigenous Canadians to recognize our complicity in terms of colonial systems and to educate ourselves in order to take initiative to challenge the existing system. Tammy, may I ask how you personally participate in reciprocal accountability?
In my journey, it has been very important to, in my growth, to understand how colonial history has influenced and devastated First Nations communities and Indigenous people. I further work at reflecting on this and position myself within this. Sometimes this requires cultivating an honest self-awareness, which at times can sting, but I try to lean into it and sit with the discomfort and reflect on it. I additionally spend a considerable amount of time working to understand and acknowledge my potential biases and the stereotypes that may inform my perceptions of Indigenous people. And once they are identified, work at dismantling it. I think it is important to consider how I position myself and be very intentional in creating an equitable and safe place in order to work towards authentic collaboration and reconciliation. Next slide, please. Just going to move a bit because the sun's coming around. Didn't quite plan for this one. Thank you for the next slide. Oh, we could go back to the quote. I would appreciate that. I also continue to learn about the Indigenous worldview and reflecting on how it can inform my professional practice and personal life. Learning about Indigenous worldview has helped me to decenter my white ways of learning and unlearn and dismantle the foundation of colonized teachings that I have grown up with. I would like to share with you this quote from a discussion paper by Smith and Mussel, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, that beautifully describes mental wellness from an Indigenous worldview. I will give you a moment to read it yourself so you don't have to hear me go through it. But I find it a very moving and also meaningful, good teaching quote.
Yeah, I really appreciate this quote. Thank you for offering us this insightful quote. I think for myself, when I'm thinking about what the authors are saying, it really speaks to the fact that when you think about health and healing, that it's about connection and thinking about health from different aspects and not just thinking about it in terms of in terms of the physical. I know for myself, thinking about my mental wellness has been a really important part of just taking care of my overall health. And so, I find this to be a very meaningful quote. Right now I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and the author, Robin Kimmerer, is a botanist who incorporates Indigenous teachings into her practice. And so I was just thinking about one of the passages, and it talks about when she was growing up, and she would spend a lot of time on the land, how that really helped to inform her way of looking at the world. And when she'd be picking berries and nuts, that again has had a real profound impact on the way that she, I guess, has a relationship to the land. And I'm finding that as I go through each page, I'm learning a lot.
Oh, thank you for sharing about it. I'll have to look at reading that. That sounds like an amazing book.
It's a terrific book, and I just wanted to put a plug in for Braiding Sweetgrass. And I'm particularly looking forward to the next part of our conversation, where you give us a deeper insight into your anti-oppressive practice. I'm finding that the previous slide where you had the four squares really does a wonderful job of showing how you center yourself in this work.
Thank you. Next slide then, before I go for any further. It was during my master's in social work that I learned a great deal about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, which inspired me to apply for this position, where I can participate in addressing and dismantling the social and political conditions that shape Indigenous people's health on a more macro level. I have learned to embrace my lifelong journey as a learner, and I work to participate in daily reflection and reflexivity. I not only accept the truth of reconciliation theoretically, but also in my heart. And I try to lean into the tension of my own complicity with racist and colonized thinking, so I can fundamentally take responsibility and confront Canada's historical and current systematic violence against Indigenous and racialized people. I have further learned to understand oppression and discrimination with an intersectional lens, which helps me see how people's social identities can overlap and create compounding experiences of discrimination. I feel it is important in my lifelong journey to acknowledge and be constantly mindful of the seen and unseen privileges that have been provided to me throughout my life as a white settler, and learn to work through my white privilege, defensiveness, and entitlement. I have learned a great deal from Rial and Vicky, who hold the transformational talks, about the actions necessary as a white settler to participate in reconciliation. One conversation that especially resonated with me is when Vicky spoke to the essence of being an ally. Vicky discussed that being an ally is not a noun, but a verb, and requires action and continual commitment. I also that it should not be just utilized as a label. I have also learned to be very cautious with identifying myself as an ally for additional reason. It is my belief that it is not up to me to identify whether I am an ally. It is up to the person or people whom I'm engaging with to ultimately make the judgment on whether or not I deserve that honor. I also work at, well, not work is the right word, but interconnection for me is also a foundation of my spiritual understanding, whether it is amongst us humans, but also with Mother Earth and the animals that we share the world with. Yet for me, I feel there is a need to move beyond just having this understanding, but also move into action. I contemplate that the true essence of interaction would mean that all beings are equal and experience equity and social justice, which unfortunately is not the case. Our society and world is unjust, oppressive, and violent towards so many people, including Mother Earth. Thus, I feel it is my spiritual responsibility to actively help in dismantling this and work towards the true essence of interconnection. Also in my journey, I've learned a great deal about how the construction of our reality is interconnected with language, with which post-structuralism theory highlights. So if our reality is unjust and oppressive, I feel a need to dig deep and deconstruct the language and words utilized to create this reality. Understand the foundation and origins of the words. It is like being a detective where you investigate the potential patriarch and oppressive words and language being utilized. I feel words can be weaponized and utilized to intentionally and strategically oppress and discriminate. I have also learned how words can be utilized in the process of othering, which is a process of attributing negative characteristics to other individuals or groups in order to set yourself and represent yourself as opposite to them. How many times have you heard the phrase, those people? I myself am guilty of historically utilizing this, until I realized and reflected on how this form of micro-invalidation or aggression, which sometimes can be unconsciously used, but also used intentionally and strategically. Racism and oppression relies and grows when it is unnamed and unchallenged. I feel it is necessary to name it and challenge it. Don't let it hide, and don't let it be unconscious and invisibly ingrained in our lives. Critical social work theory has also guided my reflective practice. It proposes that there is a need to expose the mechanism of social oppression through critical inquiry, and has helped me to explore the underlying frameworks, assumptions, and the dominant conceptualizations contributing to discrimination and oppression. It has further encouraged me to put a critical lens on policy development, where systematic oppression often lies. If historical policies create oppressive realities, in turn, progressive policy development can be used to create social transformation and justice. I also feel one can take this investigative and critical lens even further and look how capitalism contributes to the oppression of people, especially the oppression of racialized individuals and groups. What words, language, and policies were utilized to allow the oppressive practices of capitalism to flourish? Also, with that being said, consumerism also can be critically looked at, taking into consideration it plays a significant role in modern capitalism. I often think about how my consumerism may be contributing to the oppression of someone or something on its pathway to me. Bonti, I believe you wanted some references?
Yes. I wanted to inquire if you had any resources that you would recommend for people that are interested in learning more about incorporating a social justice lens into their work or critical consciousness. And
Yeah.
also, I just wanted to thank you for, sharing and being vulnerable, because I think sometimes it's hard for us to really be able to be introspective and think about how we might be complicit in some of our actions and not really be thinking about what we can be doing differently.
Thanks. Yes, I do have some good resources I think I can offer. There's an article by Robin Ward in 2019. She wrote this article, Building Trust Before Truth, How Non-Indigenous Canadians Can Be Allies, which I found very helpful on my journey. And I always seem to come back to it in order to refresh my focus and situate myself. Robin talks about her journey as an ally and provides a list of numerous resources to consider as well in the article, which can be very useful. She also talks about the need for integrity, even when it gets tough, and how it doesn't happen overnight, but the importance of trying to operate with integrity every day, and that it is a continuous daily effort. There are also several good guides and toolkits on allyship. One particular toolkit that I found helpful was created by the Hamilton Niagara Haldman Brandt Local Health Integration Network. They developed a toolkit called The Guide to Honoring Culture, Authentic Collaboration, and Addressing Discrimination. I found it a very helpful guide and can be found on the internet in PDF form as well. I like how it's formatted, and it's a good read. It breaks it down for a person quite easily. Also, when considering learning material to guide your journey, I suggest reading works by Indigenous folks. And more so focus on that as well. I came across a book in my master's, one particular book that I used quite a bit in writing several of my papers. It's called Living Indigenous Leadership, Native Narratives on Building Strong Communities, which was edited by Carolyn Kennedy and Tina Fraser. It is written by Indigenous women scholars across from Canada and the US and New Zealand who have successfully challenged mainstream education to secure the highest academic credentials in institutions of higher learning can offer. I also suggest not only focusing on written and academic material, but also listening to the wisdom, experiences, and stories of Indigenous folks and elders. Some of the learnings I have gratefully received from Indigenous elders are very actually difficult for me to put in words. I recall an honor of being in a circle where an elder drummed and sung a song, and it moved my spirit and taught me something that unfortunately I am not even poetic enough or skilled enough in words to describe, but the song and the drum and the storytelling, there's such valuable and great knowledge. I really encourage you to take the time to participate and listen. That's the most important thing, listen.
Just hearing what you're saying, Tammy, when you're speaking about that being in that space with an elder and experiencing the drumming, the dancing, I think even if you're not able to put it in words poetically, we can experience. I have a true sense of that emotion that you're experiencing, and it is hard to put into words. So I understand what you're saying. Also, just in terms of the resources, the point that you were mentioning about making sure that you can get access to works by Indigenous scholars and Indigenous authors, that's so important because, as a non-Indigenous person, I think like for myself, I sometimes think I'm going into my work with good intention, but we also have to make sure that we're accessing materials that are written by the original stewards of these lands. And it's also, I think, noteworthy what you're saying about being in spaces with elders and making sure that we are accessing information in different forms. This particular slide I found to be, just for myself, it resonates because you're breaking down your approach to your practice. And so I think it's something that we can all learn from. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We're going to be, as I was just mentioning, sharing the resources that Tammy has mentioned in a follow-up email. So if you're curious about those, be on the lookout for that follow-up email. Yeah, and I think we'll go to the next slide now.
Well, I also want to highlight some of the teachings I have received while at Aboriginal Health. And everyone here has been so supportive and gracious with sharing their wisdom with me. And I so appreciate that and I honor that. My previous director, Dion, modeled and taught me the importance of being intentional and specifically with creating a safe place for others. So being intentional and creating a safe place with my words, thoughts, and actions, and even energy. And I will always be grateful for the safe place that Dion provided me on my learning journey and his intentional and resonant leadership that he offered me. I hold my hands in honor to him. Thank you, Dion. I additionally very much appreciate the wisdom that our executive director, Leslie, has shared with us. I've learned a great deal about the value of calling upon one's ancestors for strength and support that Leslie has encouraged and taught us. And as a woman, to call upon and honor my ancestral matriarchs, whose love and strength has greatly contributed to me being here today. Leslie has further taught me that you are not just representing yourself in your words and actions, but you are also representing your ancestors. So for me, this helps guides me to become more accountable in my words and actions and to carry myself with dignity. This wisdom was not necessarily something I received while growing up, but I guess it's better late than never. You're never too old to learn. Well, hopefully my ancestors will see it that way. But Leslie, I thank you and I honor your wisdom and your strength and your teachings. Thank you very much. So I guess we'll go to the next slide. This is my cell phone number, my work cell phone number, and my work email. So please don't hesitate to connect with me at any time, or if you have some questions about today. And before we go to the question and section period, I would like to take this opportunity to give you thanks, who are all here today, and honor you on your lifelong journey as a learner and your journey towards reconciliation and the commitment you are providing to offer culturally safe care to the Indigenous clients who access Vancouver Coastal. It was a great respect and I honor the work that you do.
Tammy, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your teachings and wisdom with us today. I know that when we come here to do this work, it can sometimes be a little bit nerve-wracking, but I think that you've really offered us a lot to think about, and hopefully we can take this knowledge with us and bring some of that reflective practice into our workspace. So we'll get started with some questions and comments now.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I have for you is, when we're thinking about reconciliation, how do we hold each other accountable? I guess I'm thinking more specifically in terms of Mary Ellen Turpin-Lafon's In Plain Sight report. And I'm curious as to what speak out culture would look like to you. So how do we hold ourselves accountable, and what would be some ways that we can, I guess, not necessarily call people out, but what would be a way that we can make sure that we are doing work in a way that we're, keeping each other accountable?
Well, one, I think, I potentially, you have to be intentional, and I think with providing a safe place. If you are going to engage in a conversation with someone about, if you feel that you need to participate, if you hear something that is oppressive or that is derogatory, and providing a safe conversation to explore it. And I think safety is definitely paramount, and be willing to overcome potentially some of the uncomfortableness. Racism, oppression, discrimination thrive in silence. So there is a need to bring it forth. There is a need to talk about it. There's a need to be uncomfortable when talking about it. And it's not always easy. I feel one of the biggest challenges I have right now is engaging in conversations with people who I consider senior to me, that I hold dear in my heart, who I believe come from a foundation of, kindness and giving. And if you hear them use terms that were historically quite common, that are derogatory, that are discriminated, oppressive, or outright racist, to engage in that conversation with them. And I struggle sometimes with that, especially if I think it may hurt their feelings, even though I'm trying to provide a safe place. But it's important to pursue the conversation and bring it forward, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think you're right. It can be tricky when, there is a power differential involved, and also even in conversations with close friends. But again, what you were saying about, when you're coming from it with intentionality, and making sure that the words that you're using can resonate. Like in conversations that we've had, I found that to be really helpful. Just, when we're having conversations about different topics, because I think, again, like we might not even realize some of the language that we're using might not necessarily be, it's not respectful, but that like we can use more intentional thought when we're speaking. Yeah. We've got some more questions for you here. Just give me a moment to pull them up.
Okay, I actually see one it says, Tammy, how do you deal with the situations where you had made missteps on protocols or have inadvertently offended some of Indigenous folks that you work with? Good question, and tough, yes. Thank you for asking that. I feel you be gracious, you apologize, and you listen to the feedback that a person is offering you, and it is a gift. And like I said, it may sting, but if that person is willing to guide you on your journey and how to not do it again, I think you need to be open and to receiving this. I think you be apologetic, and then hopefully the persons or people know that it wasn't done in a malicious manner. You could potentially say that, and then listen. Sit with the gift that's being given to you and listen to the potential, and learn from it. And it's your responsibility, so you need to take responsibility for it.
Yeah, that's the point that you're making about taking responsibility for it. I think that's something that hopefully with time and increased self-awareness we'll be able, like even for myself, that we'll be able to do. Another question that has come up is about microaggressions. So how can we begin to notice if we are making microaggressions or assumptions?
It can be tough, because for a person who, and I can speak for myself, who is white and grew up in white privilege, and oppression and privilege is the foundation of our society, and it's so integrated in our policies and our learning and our teaching that many times we don't even realize that we are reading the context of it, that we are participating in it. So I suggest really reading the foundations of what oppression is, language, and then really staying in tune with your feelings. And I don't know, for some people, I can tell when I am getting, and I'm going to say it, a bit pissy, and the words come out. What is the intent of those words? What is the foundation of the words? And are you using it because it's something you're only familiar with? Because historically, society, family is what you grew up with. So being really in tune with the energy, your intention, and explore what some of the, I guess just be really mindful and reflects on the words you're using and why you're using them. If you're trying to establish a power differential with someone, if you are trying to correct them, and I so suggest with coming from a white privileged background, we are accustomed to correcting everybody. And that's how we've grown up. And that's how our foundation of our society is established. So once again, listen. When you are struggling, that your feelings are arising, I think sometimes the best thing to do is to listen and be mindful of why you're presenting or feeling a certain way about a word or a phrase or your interaction with someone. What is the intention of it? And sometimes it's going to hurt and sting that you realize, oh my goodness, I want to control this person. I want to control the dialogue, the narrative, and just be mindful of that, because we've been historically brought up as white settlers and white privilege that we have the right to do that, and we don't. So it's unlearning. It's unlearning everything that we basically have been taught in the foundation of white privilege, and being careful of the energies associated with the wordings we utilize in our interactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, like what I'm hearing a lot is, to come from a place of humility. And I think that that's something that you do so well. Another question that we received has to do with sitting with that discomfort of the legacy of colonization. So, one of our attendees is asking if you can explain more about sitting with that discomfort of a legacy of colonization.
Yes, definitely. You need to sit with it, and you need to acknowledge it, and you need to acknowledge your participation within it, and acknowledge the harms and devastation. Yet I caution with sitting within that context too long, so it immobilizes you, because the guilt and the pain and the of hearing the truth about reconciliation can almost immobilize you. So in order to be effective in taking action, you have to move beyond that. It doesn't mean forgetting about it or not moving past it. It has to be your essence. It has to still stay with you, but you got to move beyond the grief and the sorrow, and knowing that your ancestors participate in genocide, and also that you may not be responsible for your ancestors, but you need to take responsibility, and not to get paralyzed in it, because then you won't be able to mobilize and take action. That's my feelings and perspective of it, because I have felt immense grief and immense shame. And yeah, it's not something that I was taught growing up. The legacy of Canada within the residential schools, the 60s scoop, the genocide, and the war against Indigenous people. And I think also sitting and utilizing the words, the truth of the words, genocide. You need to, for me, I need to acknowledge that this occurred and not rosy it up with softer words. So I understand the devastation. Well, and I won't completely understand. It's not my, I can acknowledge. I will never understand it to the context of the First Nations communities or Indigenous people, but to acknowledge it and work towards reconciliation and active reconciliation. I can't just acknowledge it and sit with it and not do anything. That's my journey and my perspective. And everyone, I imagine, will have different steps and journeys, and to honor that, and also to be gentle with yourself, because I imagine as helping professionals, you will be gentle with your clients, and so in turn be gentle with yourself on your journey, because you're gonna potentially, I can only speak with myself, you're going to make mistakes. It's lifelong. You will never master it. You'll fall on your face, and I'm only speaking from myself. You just need to get back up and keep participating and listening and honoring. And I caution, like I believe in curiosity. Be curious, but also with respectful curiosity. And what I mean that coming from a white settler privilege is that just because you're curious about something too doesn't mean you are entitled or have the right to hear someone's narrative. So yes, you may be curious, but there needs to be underlining respect and honor there too on that journey.
Yeah, I think what you were saying, just in terms of, coming from a place of curiosity, but also recognizing that even though you might be curious about someone's story, that there's a time and space for everything, and that it ultimately is about respecting others and being able to navigate those relationships. Yeah. Another question that has come up is concerning, I guess, the use of some words that we often see in Aboriginal health. So often in schools, we're taught words such as cultural awareness, sensitivity, and safety. So it's easy to accept it as being mindful of the core of these terms, but what does this look like? What phrases are spoken, and how can we practice this? I guess, like, really, how do we actively engage with this in a healthcare setting?
Let me think about that for a minute. I think, I'm just going to read it here so I can,
Yeah, take your time.
What does it look like? And what phrases are spoken? How can you practice this in a healthcare center? I believe in a healthcare center, you could combine a trauma-informed approach with a culturally safe approach as well. And they need to be, for me, and not to speak to everybody else, but I feel they need to be in a partnership. So also, and I'm not sure if I'm answering this correctly, but when engaging with a client or how this looks in healthcare setting, the lived experience of the client or patient is the truth. And we are not here to impose labels on them, whether it's opposing trauma label on someone, because we need to understand the essence and where the person situates themselves within their lived experience. And I think if you start there and understand that it's a gift to receive the narrative of that person, and then that helps you navigate and be in a helping partnership with that person. If you start where the person's at and you honor where the person's at, and not to impose potential labels on the person. I hope I'm answering that. I may not have. I guess just starting where the person at, and whatever theoretical foundation you're coming from never overrides the person's where they're at and what they need and how they envision and how they want to participate in their journey. And you're there as a helping partnership. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. But there's lots of questions that are coming in. And I guess another question is asking about accountability. And so the question is from Daniela, and she's asking, how do we hold people accountable in brave spaces with people of mixed backgrounds in order to honor the harm caused to historically oppressed groups without compounding the harm by having a conversation about it with the person who might have said something harmful? And then, yeah, there's a lot going on here. In order to ensure the issue is addressed, that the people know, I guess, whom they're addressing.
Oh, good question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to honor that and answer that to the capacity that you're looking for. Yes, if I'm correctly understanding this, yes, you're going to be working and engaging in relationship and narratives with people who have experienced their life situation based on trauma, and how to provide a safe environment for them. Oh, that's a good question. And I don't know if I necessarily have the specific answer for that, but where I stand is that providing a safe place, and I know I've probably said this numerous times, within understanding and listening to where the person is at, why they potentially are utilizing or conversing in a certain manner. I would be cautious with using the word addressing. I would like to maybe reword it if I was in that context of participating in conversation, participating in a helping partnership, that hopefully that the person that you're trying to work with is receptive to that, because there's potential that a person may not be receptive to dialogue that you want to have with them, and you can't impose, because as soon as someone potentially is resistive or feels that they are being targeted or threatened, a lot of people will back away and they will not be receptive to the message. So if you can be nurturing, listening, and listen, I don't know if that answers that for you. Sorry. And this is from my perspective. It doesn't mean it would necessarily work for everybody else, but from my journey and my perspective, I would try to start there.
Yeah, no, I think, for anyone that's joining us, hopefully, they've been able to gather a little bit more information, and also just understanding like some of your portfolio. And I was also just thinking,
yeah. And
sorry,
also
go ahead.
I am learning. I do not have this down pat. I do not have this mastered. I still have so much to learn. And if forgive me if I'm not able to answer your questions or you don't think I'm far enough on my journey, but I am working at it, and it will be continual growth for me, and there'll be setbacks and I won't have all the answers for myself or necessarily everybody else, but I will continue working to participate and grow and learn.
Yeah, I think that's something, in terms of ensuring that we're bringing that approach of humility and lifelong learning into our workspace. I think that that's something that all of us really try to do. Another question that we have is, can you share a story of how you've learned something? I guess I'm just maybe sharing a personal story in the workplace.
Oh, there's so many to choose from. Oh, yikes. There's so many. I guess I can speak to, when I went into one of the Indigenous communities to talk to the service providers, and it was where I really learned that I needed to listen. One of the service providers who was Indigenous was engaging in a conversation, and during the conversation I went to interject, and I was politely told, no, I am not finished. So that's where I have really learned and not that I haven't learned it before, but the value is that you need to listen and learn. And yeah, that, I don't know if that's answered. There's so many learnings. I could pull so many that but I remember that very vividly. That is like, okay, I need to sit, I need to listen, and be respectful of the narrative that I am in front of. And that's, I think, in every aspect of your life, whether you're working with people or whether it's your engagement to others. Be present, be intentional in your engagements, and even if you have to plan a bit, be prepared to go into communities or your engagement with clients or patients. Go in with attention and go with the intention of providing safety and honor and cultural safety. And yes, you might make mistakes, but I think if you go in with that intention and a good place from your heart, that's huge. That's foundation, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much of what you're saying really resonates with me. You're talking about mindfulness, intentionality, and really, you know, when you're in a conversation, making sure that you're truly listening. I think that idea that a lot of us have been exposed to in terms of active listening, it's something I know for myself. Like I've been exposed to it. I know what the practice is, but when we're living in the society that we are, we're constantly bombarded by so much stimuli, and so it can make it hard at times to really be present and to participate in a way where we're making sure that we are actively listening. So I think this has been, like, for myself, just so useful in terms of thinking about some of the ways that I also approach my work.
Thank you.
If we can just ask one
Okay.
final question, and then any other additional questions will probably be emailed to you.
Okay, yes, and you have my email too and my cell phone. You're more than welcome to connect with me, and yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I guess the last, I guess not last question, but just for our webinar today, there is a question about community. And so what they're asking is, how do we in the community follow up with the questions we have regarding the mistreatment or diagnosis in the emergency department for our Indigenous clients? And this is namely in regards to an assumption of alcohol or drug use.
Oh, there's different mechanisms, and I wrote this down because I thought it potentially might be asked. We have a Aboriginal health patient team experience that will, if you have concerns with how your client experience or the words utilized with regards to substance use, because there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of negative connotations utilized and still utilized with regards to substance use within a medical model. So I don't have the link to me right now, but there are ways to follow up with patient experience, and maybe we can put those in the follow-up section with the resources and everything. Also, yeah, you can connect with the Aboriginal Health Department, and we can give some numbers. Even if you want to connect with me, myself, I can navigate it for you and make sure it gets to the right people to look into this. But yes, definitely, I imagine people coming back into the community have experienced discrimination and derogatory comments with regards to substance use, because of the medical model hasn't been kind at all with regards to how they label that reality for people. So yes, if all else fails, send it to me. I'll help navigate it. If not, we have some other mechanisms of looking into it as well. Aboriginal health as a whole.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. I've just listed the patient experience team that you mentioned, Tammy, in the chat box, and we will follow up with resources as Tammy has mentioned. I just, again, I mean, I have, I think, thanked you, but not in a proper sense. And I think, you know, when we come together in conversation, you were mentioning how you're on this learning journey. And for myself too, I think I'm constantly learning and thinking about how I can unlearn. And I just really want to thank you for your time and sharing your teachings with us today. Yeah, thanks, Tammy.
Thank you, Avanti, and thank you for being so supportive and guiding me to doing this. This not my forte, but thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. And as Tammy mentioned, if you do have any questions, just feel free to send her an email as listed at tammy.brumwell@vch.ca. And we hope you have a lovely day. Thanks so much,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you for being here.
Bye now.